All right, let's take a look at Mathcad Prime 5.0. This is an introductory tutorial about just the basics of Mathcad. So when you open Prime 5, this is the screen that you'll look at. And like most Windows programs, we have a ribbon and we have tabs up here that give you the different options that you have for manipulating the software. So let's just kind of look at what we have here. So obviously we have our the main button here so when you look at the options, here's the about. This is the license that tells you where the license server is at. And then some of the options that you have, you can change the location of templates. This one is pretty important. It's an alternate folder for shared templates. So in other words, you can create a work group, which we'll probably explore in the future, where you can actually download the templates that have been vetted by the service line so that you can work on those. But this is where you would go to do that. So also we have things like save, save as, close. The new tab is so that you can open up a blank worksheet, open up templates, and I'll open up one here in a minute, and then here's the shared templates. So let's go to my templates, and I've set one open for a blank wood template. And so there we go. So what it did was it populated this header. So we have headers and footers. I don't have anything in the footer for this one, but if you double click this region, then this takes you over to the header where you can add stuff and change it. Double click the main body where this grid is, and it takes you out of the header. So let's look at some of these tabs and ribbons up here. So obviously you have your new, this is the quick access button, open files, close. I like to have a close file button here. So I go to this one and I'm going to right click it, and it says add to quick access toolbar. And there it is. If I want to get rid of it, I just right click it again and I can remove it. So this one allows me to close templates very quickly just by hitting that button, and then it asks me if I want to save, and then I can move on. So this is the math region here. Um, let's start with some of the basics. So one of the things you can do in Mathcad is that you can set the system of units that you're going to be working in. And Mathcad has three systems of units. There's the System International, the US customary system. Notice also that it's got, when I hold my mouse over that particular system, it says press F1 for help. So I press my F1 key, and then it takes me to a help thing where I can look up stuff. So let me minimize that. So we have SI, USCS, and then one that's it's used a lot in lab work, not so necessarily much anymore like it used to be for geotechnical and structural work. But you can have the centimeter, gram, second system of units. Let's work in the SI system of units for right now, and let me show you what Mathcad can do with units. So if I were to type in 1 foot, and the abbreviation for the units is FT, and then hit the equal signs, because I'm in the SI system of units, it's going to convert everything into SI units. So 1 pound of force, I'm typing 1 lbf and then hitting the equal key, and that converts it immediately to newtons. If I want to change this and go to the USCS system, notice that everything switches over into the US customary unit. So now if I were to type in 1 meter, 1 m equals, now it converts everything into feet. So this is kind of a handy thing to do. So obviously if you're up in Canada or everywhere in the world except of the US, you're going to be using the SI system units. And then if you're doing a template in the US, you will probably be using the USCS system units. All right, so that's the unit system. And then also another way to add units, notice that when I typed in 1 m and then hit the equal sign, it gave me a unit. So I could type it in, or another way is that I could go to the units tab, and then under length, I'll just scroll down with my mouse wheel, and there's my meters. So there's two different ways to enter um, units. And let me type in millimeters. So you can do almost everything from the keyboard. In Mathcad, there's a difference between 1 pound and 1 pound of force. All right. A pound is a mass unit, and a pound force is a force unit. So if you're using the US customary, you need to be careful of that. And most engineering calculations will use pound forces. So I'm going to click and drag and then delete all that. The only thing that you really need this units for is for things like degrees. So if I have an angle and I want to use degrees, or for degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit under temperature. So that just makes it a little bit easier to use. So a workaround is that if I wanted to type in 25 degrees, I could type in DEG and hit equals, and then that converts it to radians, or I can put RAD and it makes it explicit. So you can convert from degrees to radians, but I still like the little degree symbol because I think it looks nicer in a Mathcad format. So that's our units. The base units is allows you to show your units in not derived units, but in actual base units. So let's go to, I think a Newton is a derived unit. If I hit base units, yeah. So the Newton is derived from kilogram meters per second squared. So if I wanted to express all this stuff in base units, I would just hit that. I don't have to actually select the unit and then hit the base unit. Anywhere I'm on the sheet, it converts everything in the sheet to base units, and then I can toggle that on and off if I'm interested in. So typically we use derived units like the Newton, the kilonewton, kilopascal, things like that. All right, let's look at some of the other things on the ribbon here. So on the math page, we have constants. So there's 3 constants, and 2 especially that are pretty important for a civil and geotechnical engineer. We have pi, which we use all the time. So if I hit that and then the equal sign, it converts it to a real number. The other constants that I have are the natural logarithm base e. So I hit E and then I hit the shift caret and make that squared and then the equal sign, and that gives me the value of that. So you can put the constant in. Most of these other constants aren't very useful for civil engineering, so they have, well, there are instances, Avogadro's number, the speed of light, elementary charge, Planck's constant. You don't see those so much in civil engineering. Avogadro's number may be in environmental or wastewater treatment or something like that. Boltzmann. So the big 2 that we'll see in our calculations are, of course, pi and logarithm base e, and then sometimes you'll need to use this infinity and calculus problems because this software solves calculus problems pretty efficiently. Programming, you can write programs in Mathcad. If you're using some of these special programmings like if, for, while, return, you can't type these in. You have to use this menu to enter them for some reason. So we'll get to programming at some later point. Under symbols, you've got your Greek symbols. You've got some additional math symbols. And the nice thing about this is, again, when you hold your mouse over it, if you see the F1 there, you can hit the F1 key, and it'll tell you a little bit about it. Let me find one where it does a better job of that. Let's go to the real number. Well, let me find something a little better here. F1. Okay, so now this one, so this will give you information about what those different operators do. All right, so here's our operators. So we have things like plus, minus. You don't need to input these from the menu. You can just type a plus, a minus. The slash is a divider sign. We have some calculus stuff, um, the derivative, an integral, a limit, a summation, a product coefficient. The prime operator returns the first derivative of a single variable function. You can have some Boolean operators down here. For example, this greater than or equal or this logical or. Very handy in programming, as we'll see in the future. These three are pretty important. This is the definition, so you can type this in or you can type this in, or you can select it from the menu. For things like this, I tend to use the keyboard shortcuts. So if I want to type in something like, if I want to take a variable, so like the letter A, and I want to assign it a value, I'll hit the Shift colon, and that gives me the colon with the little equal sign, and then I can assign that a value. So let's say, since I'm in SI units, let's say 25 meters, and then hit enter. And let's say I want to create another variable, B, and let's say that's equal to 25 millimeters, hit enter. And now I want to create a third variable, C is equal to A plus B. And now, instead of hitting the shift semicolon, I just hit the equal key, up on the top there, and it automatically adds those together and converts them to an appropriate unit. So you don't have to put stuff in the correct units. Mathcad does all that for you, which makes it really nice, especially if you're working in different units. So let's say I had 25 meters and I wanted to add 10 feet to it. Mathcad automatically makes that calculation and transfers all the dimensions into the right format. Let's say I wanted to change this, instead of meters, I want it in feet. So I just erase the meters and put in FT and hit enter. And now it converts all that to feet for me. So I can switch back and forth from units however I want to. I can add kilometers and furlongs. I mean, seriously, there's a furlong in here under length, a furlong. So if I wanted a furlong, let's say 1 furlong. Whoops, 1 furlong. Well, let me delete that and start over again. So I go 1, and then I go to my unit, length, a furlong, and I hit the equal sign. It gives it to me in meters. So if I wanted to add 100 meters, Mathcad does it automatically for me, and I don't have to worry about it. If I wanted to add, let's say kilopascals to furlongs, well, now I got a problem. Mathcad won't let me do it, and so it actually gives me an error message and says, "Hey, you screwed something up. You're adding apples and oranges, and you got to at least get things in the right unit." So again, one of the great things about Mathcad is that it's absolutely ruthless in making sure that your units are consistent and you're not trying to add apples and oranges. So let me click and drag over all this stuff and delete it. Let's look at some of the other things here. So we've got operators. Let me show you how to do a Greek letter. Let's say I wanted to use the Greek letter alpha as a variable. So I can go up here and select alpha and say alpha equals, let's just give it a real number 2. Or another way to do it is type the letter A and then hold down the control key and hit G, and now I've got the same thing. Shift colon, and let's say it's equal to 3. So now what Mathcad has done is that if I were to go up here and type in alpha or A and the control G and then hit the equal sign, it gives me 2. And it'll be 2 until I bring it down below or equal to a new um, definition that I've made of that same variable. So once it's above it, Mathcad thinks that I want it to be 2. If it's parallel with it or below it, then Mathcad reassigns that variable and returns it to me um, based on the last number that I gave it. So you have to kind of be careful about that. If you assign a variable name up at the top of a worksheet or template and you change that, then everything from that point down will change over to the new variable. So let's delete that. Let's see what else we got under symbols. Um, so we got real numbers. We got some math that we can use in here, Boolean. We got some Hebrew. So if you want to do the Aleph Not set, you could put that in here. And then if you were doing something in monetarily, you could use the euro, yen. This is a generic currency that you can redefine. So you've got a lot of options here in Mathcad um, for how you name variables. The other thing I want to talk about naming a variable is a lot of time you'll see subscripts in variable. So let's say I had a variable, let's say epsilon sub p. So I type in E and then I hit Control G and that converts it to the Greek. And then I've got a couple of choices. I can go up here and click subscript, which drops the cursor down a little bit, and I can put the letter P there and then hit Shift colon and type in 25, for example. Another way to do that is to type the E, then hit Control G, and then while I've got the Control key held, hit the underscore key, which is next to the 0 on the keyboard, and that drops it as well. And then I can type in, let's say instead of the plastic strain, let's put the elastic strain in, and let's just give it a number. All right, so there's two different ways to put subscripts in. One is by using the subscript um, toggle here, and the other one is just by holding down the control key and at the same time typing in the underscore key. So I typically use the keyboard shortcut method. It's faster than taking my hands off the keyboard and using the mouse, but you know, Mathcad gives you options on how to do that. All right, so the other thing is up here is symbolic. So Mathcad not only does things numerically, it also does calculus and algebra symbolically. So if you were to type in, I won't go through that now, but if you were to type in an integral sign that was in a functional form, and then you could use some of these values here and have Mathcad, if there's a closed form solution of that, Mathcad will calculate it for you. So I may demonstrate in a later one, but that just kind of gives you a flavor for here. So the other thing that we want to input from the math tab, the ribbon here, is that I can add a text box. So in Mathcad, when you start typing, Mathcad thinks you're doing math. If you want to type in text, you have to hit one of these two boxes, either the text block, which inserts a region across the entire page, and you can type in text, and then move your mouse or the arrow key or something like that and get out of it. Or you can do a box, which is much smaller, but you can change the size of it. Okay, so you get two different choices when you're putting text in. All right, so the other thing is that let's leave this page for just a minute and go over to the document page. And so here in the document page, we've got some options on how we want the document to look. So we can turn the grid on or off using this button. We can change the size of the grid. So when you change the size of the grid, the way Mathcad controls where things are located on the sheet is that it moves over. So I'm using my left, right, up, down arrow key. It moves over one box. So you put your cursor somewhere, and then you start typing, and then it lines up. And if I wanted to type something that was aligned to the same thing, I would just point my cursor at that box and start typing my math, and it lines everything up. If I want to line everything up left to right, I just go on the same line and move my cursor. Now, if I want finer control about the way of how things look, then I'm going to move over to the finer grid, which basically doubles the spacing, or halves the spacing is probably a better way of putting it. All right. The other thing I can do is that in the mode I'm in now, which is page, this is basically what you see is what you get kind of screen. But if I switch, then I go outside the boundaries of what's actually going to be printed or shown. And then I can do stuff over here that won't show up in the template that I'm actually doing. So if you got some stuff here that you want to try out that you really don't want to be shown on the main page, you can put it over here and then move back to another view. You've got two bars, scroll bars here, so I can change the size of stuff. And then I've got one down here at the lower right. And I've also got a little toggle button that switches me back and forth from a page view to a draft view. All right, so I can change the size. I can change the orientation. I can change the size of my margins. I can bring the margins in, or I can widen them out. So now I've got a lot of white space over here if I wanted to show that, but typically I'll just be in standard spacing. So if I want to mess with a header, I can toggle back and forth here again, or I can double click, and that takes me to the header. And if I want to put a footer, I can do the same thing or double click. Here in my headers and footers, I can put automatic stuff like page numbers. I can put dates. I can put file names and paths. Um, so that's kind of some of the stuff that we do for the document here. So the last thing I want to show in this video before I kind of shut it down is the help part. So this is under resources. So over here you've got different references, the read this first, an installation admin guide, a migration guide, what's new. Tend not to use that so much. What's really helpful is this help box that brings up this panel, and so you can go and look for various information, or you can type in a search. Or like I've shown before, if you're in certain things, you can, if you hover over it, a little box will come up and tell you what it is, and if you hit F1, it'll take you to the appropriate help page for that. So going back to resources, so the tutorials are good. What I'm actually, so you can actually work through all these tutorials that kind of give you a good feel for how Mathcad works. Then the help key, the keyboard shortcuts. There's a little, I'll pull this over here. So here's a little PDF file that comes up that shows you all the different shortcuts that you could use. This is kind of an advanced user. Once you use Mathcad for a while, you start getting a feel for how the keyboard shortcuts work. And then there's some other stuff. You can join part of a community, and you can get some other resources here to help as well. Let me close this one. All right, so I'm going to stop recording here, and then I'll come back and we'll look at some other parts of the ribbon in the next video.